Nine, 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 nine. Hit it, nine, 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 nine. A nine, 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 nine. A nine, 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 nine. Hit it, I. Hit it, nine, 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 nine. Hit it, nine, nine, nine. Hit it, Shalom, shalom, beautiful friends. It is great to be with you today for session 44. And good news, it's like you finish a marathon and you keep running. You're like, hey, the marathon shouldn't be the end. So actually, we're going to 60, not 50. There's just too much great psychology out there and that we haven't covered. And I want to be so comprehensive in the field. So we will have, VBM will now have the most comprehensive Torah and psychology podcast out in the world that exists on studies and theory and psych and Torah, and that's really exciting. And so the game plan today is we're going to do a little poll question, and then we're going to do a little text study, as is our new approach. And then I'll make my presentation, and then we'll open up the conversation. And today is on human connection. Human connection. So let's start with a poll question on human connection. What enables one to feel most connected to other humans in a community? You know what? Let me change that phrasing from what enables you to feel most connected to other humans in a community. Let's move it out of the abstract. Is it praying or singing together? Is it learning intellectually together? Is it sports, either playing or watching? Or is it deep personal conversation together? What enables you to feel the most connected to other humans in a community, right? This is not about marriage or family. This is about community. How do you feel connected? Okay, very interesting. 14% say praying or singing together. 29% say learning intellectually together. No one says sports together. All right, it's fine. And 57% say deep personal conversation together. Although that's a little bit of a cheat because that feels like a one-on-one rather than a community. But yes, I get it. And that's wonderful. So let's start with a little text study from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov was the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidut. And here he writes in his work, Likutim. He was the Breslov movement. Actually, it's interesting. There's two movements, two Hasidic movements that do outreach, right? Most Hasidic Jews, they do no outreach. They're very insular. They want nothing to do with the outside world aside from business. There's two groups that are very much outreach. That is Lubavitch and that is Breslov, Chabad and Breslov. And interesting enough, the two groups that do outreach instead of being purely insular, both of their rebbes are dead. Right? Every other Hasidic group, their rebbes are alive. Right? For Breslov, Rabbi Nachman is still their rebbe. They didn't replace him. And of course, for Chabad, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe is still alive. They never replaced him. Okay, these are conversations, big conversations for another time about second comings of a Rebbe, but we won't go there right now. But anyways, Rabbi Nachman, he writes over here, sometimes when people are joyous and dancing, they grab a person from outside the dancing circle, one who is sad and melancholy, and they force them to join them in their dance. Thus it is with joy. When a person is happy, their own sadness and suffering stands off on the side. But it's a higher achievement to struggle and pursue that sadness, bringing it also into the joy until it's transformed. You grab hold of the suffering and force it to join with you in the rejoicing, just as in the parable. Okay, so friends, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Rabbi Nachman is saying here. What do you think he's saying? How does that speak to you?
Well, we've heard many times an expression of embrace your sorrow. In other words, come to terms with it, understand it. And only by understanding the causes and the symptoms can we turn it around and take away its negativity and learn from it.
Great. Love that. Thank you. Cheryl, hi.
Hi. It made me think of Shiva. That that's a time for the person who is sitting Shiva for sadness, but it's also a time to talk about the person that you're sad about losing, and so to me that would kind of represent both sides, bringing the community in to help you with your sadness, but also to bring you joy.
Yeah, thank you. In my view, Shiva is one of the most spiritual places I know. Um, it is a place of joy and a place of healing and a place of sadness. And there's so much depth there. That's why it says in Kohelet, better to go to a house of mourning than a house of feasting. That very much speaks to me. Okay, Gary, then Eileen.
Well, I was just simply going to say that isolation is not healthy.
Yeah, great.
Is not healthy.
Great. And it is so tempting when we feel down to isolate ourselves. It is so, so tempting. And yet we know we have to get out of that space. Yeah, amazing. Thanks. Eileen, you'll take the last one here.
Yeah. But it is a higher achievement to struggle and pursue that sadness, bringing it into the joy until it's transformed. That's a biggie. Because two things, it's probably more important to be able to face the struggle and get into your sadness and then incorporate that into yourself and transform it. So what was sad becomes a thing of joy.
Great, great. Yeah, we could imagine saying, you know what, my sadness part is over there. I'm going to keep it for over there. My joyful part's over here. But it says, no, bring it in. Bring it all the way in there. It's got to be in there. And here, to be sure, Rabbi Nachman is dealing with the self and the collective. In the collective, he's saying, when you're dancing on Simchat Torah, right, or whatever the case is, right, you see somebody who looks sad outside, bring that sad person into the dance circle. It's dealing with community. How do we reach out to people who are lost and hurt and mourning and alienated and pull them in? And it's dealing with the self, also the sadness as a part of the self. So very good, very nice. Okay, so let's dive deeper into human connection. So it's well known and established that human connection is crucial for surviving and thriving. Experts tell us it can be just as important to our physical and mental health as exercise and nutrition. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we looked at like 30 sessions ago, the love and belonging that connection provides are second only to basic biological needs, such as food and water. Human connection can even override safety needs, such as shelter and security. Right? Interesting. Of course, not all human connection is equal. There's so many different levels to it. Lower levels would include connecting through technology, such as interacting on social media. Technically, that's human connection, right? Higher levels include things like eye-to-eye communication. Then there's the aspect of touch. The importance of skin-to-skin contact in early childhood development is well documented. But the effects are also notable in adults, right? For example, holding the hands of someone in a hospital bed, right? If it's appropriate and desired. Whether it's hugging a friend or intimate touch with a partner, touch is remarkably important at regulating our emotional and physiological states. It leads to the release of oxytocin and the lowering of cortisol levels, allowing us to feel more trust and calm with less stress and anxiety. Indeed, studies have shown that regular physical contact can lead to lower levels of depression. Unfortunately, in our digital age, our digital day and age, high-level human connection is less of a given on the day-to-day, resulting in higher rates of loneliness. A recent Gallup poll reveals that 20% of adults in America report struggling with loneliness. Not just report loneliness, but struggle with it. That's approximately 52 million people in the country. Believe it or not, these numbers during the COVID-19 lockdown. The problem is so significant that in 2023, the Surgeon General declared a loneliness epidemic in the U.S. Some are terming this as a connection recession. Truly, it's easier than ever before to become cut off from a human connection, so much so that the writer George Monbiot has called this the age of loneliness. In a recent article for The Atlantic, The Antisocial Century, journalist Derek Thompson examines the ramifications of increased isolation in the US, writing, Americans are spending less time with other people than in any other period for which we have trustworthy data, going back to 1965. He writes, self-imposed solitude might just be the most important social fact of the 21st century in America. He goes on to explore how this lack of human connection is actually making society weaker, crueler, and less in touch with reality. The antisocial century is the result of one such cascade of chosen solitude, accelerated by digital world progress and physical world regress. It's an established fact that people have fewer friends now than they did in the past. I don't mean just like somebody that they're friendly with, like a friend they can trust in a moment of crisis, right? The average man has less than one in America. Women have about 3. Since 1990, there's been a 22% decline in the number of friends that people report to have. Right now here, I'm not just talking about marriage. I'm not just talking about friendship. And I'm not just talking about the decline in community for various reasons, especially because Americans are getting less religious, younger Americans, aside from other phenomena which are interesting, the return to religion. But religion is the strongest form of community in America. But I'm also talking about workplaces that went remote. So also, yeah, some of the downsides of working remote, even though there may be some positive sides. There are several common explanations for this scarcity of human connection. One of the biggest is social media. Of course, a 2023 study showed that more time spent on social media was associated with more loneliness. There's other factors contributing to the loneliness epidemic, including the ever-increasing political polarization, of course, and larger trends in mental health struggles. By the way, political polarization, we often think of, I'm a Democrat, my friend's a Republican, right? But there's many different spots on the spectrum. It's not just, partisan politics. It's all like nowadays, 1 or 2 or 3 issues are enough. Okay, maybe we're both Democrats, but we have a totally different view of the Gaza war. Maybe we're both Republicans, but we have a whole different view of gun violence, right? Maybe we're both centrists, but when it comes to pro-choice, pro-life, we're enemies, right? It's not just partisan, like the politicization of so many various issues. And then, of course, there's a politicization of Jewish community, right? Some people want their rabbi to give a political sermon every week. I want a Sharon Brous who's going to make every sermon a political fire, right? Someone else says, no, I want no politics from my rabbi. It's enough. It's enough. Tell me spirituality, right? Or like an Angela Bookdell who's going to play both sides of the aisle, right? Show me both sides of it. So, people want very different things, and rabbis are really struggling, actually, because the rabbis are really unhappy with them. They're either too political, not political enough, or political, but not the right political, right? Or they're talking about Israel, but they're on the wrong side of Israel for some people. So it's very difficult. Anyways, most recently, the advent of AI has created a whole new crisis in terms of human connection, as many people seek out relationships with AI in place of other human beings. Right? This is a growing phenomenon also. But by the way, I don't know how advanced y'all are with AI. I'm not so advanced. I'm on the middle. I'm probably in the middle of what I know, what I'm doing. But there are people who have a deep relationship, right? Their AI has a name, and it is structured so that it knows the person and it knows them even better than their spouses and friends. And so it can retrieve better searches for them based upon the knowledge of the person. And that is really replacing a lot of dialogue. I mean, people use it for therapy. They use it for friendship. And I'm not just critiquing it. There might be some good there for people who need that. There's AI products that ostensibly display genuine empathy. I don't know what we mean by genuine empathy, but certain levels of empathy. Some users seek out AI empathy because it feels more real than that offered by real people in their life, right? Maybe you're the kind of person when someone says they don't feel good, you don't really care, but you're like, oh, I'm so sorry you don't feel good, right? We all know the things to say when we don't feel it, like, oh, I'm so sorry you have a migraine today, I'm so sorry, but we don't really care, But like, can a robot give us a better answer that feels more authentic? We're even seeing companies that offer romantic relationship with AI bots, usually presenting as women, not always, but usually, as unnerving and dystopian as AI relationships might seem, they certainly highlight the very real need that people have for connection and the lack of it in their daily lives, such that they seek out a manufactured version. The truth is, there's no substitute for human connection. That deep bond formed between people when they feel seen and valued. Connecting in this way builds trust, self-esteem, and a sense of belonging. Research shows that the psychological and physical health benefits of social contact are so considerable that they can outweigh the harmful effects of common risk factors that boost life expectancy. The 2021 World Happiness Report found that during the COVID-19 pandemic, those who experienced increased connectivity with others experienced greater life satisfaction, more resilience, and better mental health. Lacking in human connection is essentially an intolerable mental state. Some experts are even beginning to look at theories of addiction in terms of filling this need, that if we can't find connection to one another, we may look to fill that void with alcohol, drugs, gambling, or other behaviors. Through this lens, addiction is not a chemical dependency so much as a failed attempt to remedy an unmet need for connection. One researcher on drug use, Professor Peter Cohen, argues that the word addiction itself is a misnomer. Instead, it should be called bonding, i.e., a heroin addict has bonded with heroin out of an inability to bond with anything else. In 12-step programs, people often repeat the adage that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but human connection. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but human connection. The concept that connection is the opposite of addiction has been popularized by the British journalist Johann Hari. Beginning with his viral TED Talk on the subject, everything you think you know about addiction is wrong. That thinks me back to our addiction section 20 sessions ago. The answer, by the way, when I say how many sessions ago, it's totally random and false. So I'm just like making up a number. The answer to the epidemic of drug use in the US isn't incarceration, he argues, but building systems designed to help drug addicts to reconnect with the world and so leave behind their addictions. By the way, one of those things, you know how we always say, oh, what's something in 20 years from now, our kids or grandkids are going to be like, oh, I can't believe you did that. One of them for sure for me, top three, is prisons. Like, we just took all these addicts and threw them in prisons and like spent tons of money breaking people and their families as opposed to trying to treat these problems. Push back on me if you disagree, of course. Such an approach has yielded tremendous results when attempted in countries such as Portugal. A lack of human connection can not only lead to addiction, researchers have found, but also to far-right politics. Oh, who knew? Okay, to all of our listeners around the world, you'll now forgive me if you think I am misnaming the problem, that so much of the problem of authoritarian politics actually comes down to human connection. The economist Norina Hertz has interviewed right-wing populist voters, and what they have in common is that they're lonely and isolated. A 2016 poll by the Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy revealed Donald Trump voters to be significantly more likely to report having fewer close friends than their Democratic counterparts. Hertz notes that part of Trump's success relied on the fact that he spoke to people's need for community through his rallies, appealing to feelings of exclusion and marginalization. Consider, for example, Trump's rallying cry that, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. His followers truly felt that he was speaking to the forsaken people, that through him, they would feel more connected and less lonely. Now, okay, I'm sure there's many listeners out there who are Trump voters who also feel that they have plenty of friends, do not feel lonely, and you're probably right. You may be voted for some really good reasons, but the trends are also real. That this was a big part of Trump's victories, was speaking to the isolated. The results have been harrowing. As Hertz writes, it is here that the manipulation of loneliness and isolation by populists takes on its ugliest and most divisive form. Populist politicians not only reinforce the sense of abandonment and marginalization that their followers feel, they set this against an alleged political favoring of people unlike them, typically immigrants and people of a different religion or race. In this way, populist fear-mongering revs up emotions, anxiety, and insecurity, and manipulates ethnic and religious difference to garner allegiance and support. It is quite shocking to learn that our need for human connection can be used against us so destructively. Now, to point to the populist voting patterns in Israel, those who are supporters of those even to the right of Bibi, who keep Bibi in power, I also want to point out to the similar phenomenon of Israel's global isolation among the nations of the world, as could be experienced recently among the United Nations, where the place emptied out when Netanyahu spoke. And pointing to that also that sense, not just in human connection isolation, but in global isolation, as Israelis experience, also leads to a sense of this similar phenomenon. Now, to be clear, I don't think the left is exempt from criticism in this realm. While the right exploits feelings of loneliness and isolation, the left continues to fragment and fail to offer a sense of unity and belonging that is so necessary for political momentum. A lot of people who have been activists in these spaces feel burnt out, and I think that's precisely because so much of the time the goal of winning has not included the goal of connection. There's a host of different concerns competing for attention, and there's different energies and fragmentation around them. And a lot of these movements have failed to connect people with a unifying message. Without the cohesion and connection that the right offers, I fear the left will continue to flounder. Given the devastating effects that lack of human connection has on us as individuals and as a society, we must ask ourselves, how do we go about fostering more human connection? And equally important, how do we get more from the connections we already have? Here's 7 steps you can take. Number 1, find people with shared interests. Bonding with others comes easier when you share the same interests or hobbies. Do you love reading? Join a book club. Care about social justice issues? Maybe your shul has its tzedek working group, right? So some people say, oh, why do I hang out with my friends? Because we've been friends for 40 years, maybe 60 years, right? Well, that might be a good reason. It might not be a good reason, right? Do you still have shared interests with those friends of 60 years? Number 2, foster connection through creativity. The arts connect people on an emotional and spiritual level, both to those around us and to a deeper aspect of our own selves. Music therapist Raymond Leon writes that he sees and feels this every day in his work with patients in a hospital setting, some of whom are fighting for their lives. Working with patients within a music therapy experience is dynamic. It's a give and take. We guide each other and we move together, he writes. Even if the patient that I'm working with is nonverbal, confused, or barely holding on at any last bit of consciousness before transitioning, we connect. We always connect through music. I want to make a point here, by the way, especially if you're local, that one of our programs now is to engage seniors who are more isolated in volunteering. And one of our goals in that is not only human connection, but creativity. That they can make dog booties, they can make wreaths, they can make, care kits. Please connect us to senior centers. We keep begging people to connect us. Everybody has friends that live in senior centers. Please connect us so that we can bring our programs there, not only so they can produce something of value for unsheltered people and the like, but so that we can support them. That's really the goal. We have them feel the main goal is what they're producing, but our main goal is really them as an ends in themselves. Number 3, learn to communicate more effectively. Just because you're communicating doesn't necessarily mean that you're connecting, right? One of the things that we teach people who are fostering kids, or really parents in general, is connect before you communicate, right? If you try to communicate something to your child, whether they're a young child or an adult child, or to anyone really, before you connect, the chance of getting your idea across is much less likely. Connect before you communicate. Well, of course, connecting is part of communication. Connect before you relay your message, really. In order to connect, we need to learn how to communicate with people in a way that leads to true closeness. A seminal work on this topic is The Pragmatics of Human Connection by Don Jackson, Paul, can't pronounce his name, and Janet Bavalis. The book emphasizes context, perception, and relational dynamics in effective communication practices. By the way, I wish sometimes people called me Shmuly, can't pronounce his last name, instead of Shmuly Yankovic, Shmuly Yankovic, Shmuly, what's the guy's name? Weird Al Yankovic. Probably once a year, people say, oh, is Weird Al Yankovic your cousin? I say, Chas v'shalom. Just kidding. I'm sure he's a fine fellow. No, not related as far as I know. Anyways, number 4, seek out spaces that are designed for foster human connection. Using shared public spaces is a wonderful way to foster connection. By the way, when we were at Tashlich at the park the other day, as I know some of you were, there was a drum circle. What a cool thing drum circles are, right? You go to the park, you make music, you connect. Using shared public spaces is a wonderful way to foster connection. Not only that, it shows the government that we value such spaces. This might involve hosting a birthday party at a public park or going on walks with friends. These spaces fall into the larger rubric of third spaces, which refers to shared environments that are not our homes and workplaces. By the way, my dear friend Jean Grossman of blessed memory, she used to, maybe this is a common thing in Arizona given the heat, she would walk with a friend every day. And for about 6 months of the year when it was too hot for her outside, they would walk through the mall. We don't have so many malls. In fact, the mall they would walk in is now closed. But what a great idea, because malls have great open spaces for walking. And if it's too hot and you're not an early morning person, walk in the mall. We don't think of a mall as a park, as a public space. It's still a commercial space, but you get the point. Number 5, get off your phone. I'm talking to myself. Get off your phone. It can be tempting to retreat into our smartphones at times of discomfort, such as a social situation when we don't know people. However, that screen not only protects us from embarrassment, it prevents us from connecting with those around us sometimes. By getting off our phone, we can become more approachable to others at a party or at a networking event. Number 6, enter with intentionality. On some occasions, the goal of an interaction might be connection itself, getting coffee with a friend to catch up. At other times, there's a shared experience that has its goal, but connection is a happy byproduct of the endeavor, like co-parenting or leading a project together. Either way, the opportunities for connection are all around us if we enter with intentionality. Okay, and lastly, for now, don't underestimate the importance of repair. Many of us are inclined to think of connection to other people as binary. We either are or we're not connecting. However, when a relationship is damaged, for example, through conflict, it can actually be an opportunity to strengthen that connection by working through the issue together. Psychologists call this rupture and repair. By thinking of conflict as a part of connection, we build stronger and more resilient bonds. So let's give an example. We all have family members that we're not as close with as we'd like to be, but the truth is we're not going to become so close again, right? It's not all or nothing. Have a little bit of connection, even if it's not a strong connection. Maybe we have a child or a son-in-law, daughter-in-law we're a little alienated from. Okay, so we can still see them a few times a year and be friendly. There's still some connection, even though it's not a great connection, or maybe a parent or a sibling, right? It's not total cutoff or total great connection. A little connection can go a long ways, even if it's not a perfect connection. I would say the same, by the way, about God. We're talking about human connection now. For those of us who participate in Yom Kippur, maybe you're a God person, maybe you're an atheist, or maybe you're something in between. And maybe we can connect a little bit, if not a lot. And that's also great. When it comes to sources of connection, the family is central. In the book, which I like, by the way, The Secrets of Happy Families, Bruce Feiler notes that study after study confirms that the number one predictor of life satisfaction comes from spending time with people you care about and who also care about you. By the way, I would put this weekly class in top 3 favorite parts of my job. And that's really hard because I've got 20 parts of my job I love. The humanitarian work and the young adult fellows and my colleagues I work with and so many things. But the connection I have with you all is one of the reasons I love this job, is because spending time with you each week is something that really enhances my life. And I would use this as a case where technology really works. Of course, it would be amazing if we're in the room together. And thankfully, I see you all in person as well. But it really works to meet each week from our homes or from our offices. Happiness, it seems, is other people, right? Who was it? Sartre, who terribly said, hell is other people. right? And maybe you feel like that sometimes, hell is other people. But happiness is people too. And for many, the other people in question are more often than not family or friends or community like this. I should note, however, that I'm being expansive with my definition of family, including, for example, the notion of chosen family, which is as legitimate as biological family. Another primary place of connection for us in the modern age is the workplace. Indeed, loneliness is an issue for employers to take seriously. On top of all the negative effects of lacking human connection, it's been proven that loneliness makes workers less effective. In a time-lagged field study with hundreds of subjects, researchers found that the lonelier employees were, the lower the performance ratings they received from their supervisor. Employers and companies need to take an interest in human connection as it shapes their ability to both retain and attract employees. This is especially true of younger generations. A recent study found that employees aged 18 to 44 were more likely to report that they would choose to stay with an organization because of the people they worked with. People seek belonging and they seek to feel seen and heard. They will go to workplaces where they find these things. This means that a lot of teens and young adults choosing employers and career paths will not only be driven by their talents and innate abilities, but also by considerations around where they feel the most connection. It's that big of a driver. This is harder and harder, by the way, for Jews who work for Jewish institutions that are outside of New York, because many Jews work remotely for New York-based organizations, or even looking at our staff, right? Our staff, we have people in Denver and North Carolina and Florida and Israel and a few other places. And so our monthly meetings have been really crucial for us to connect, but it's really hard. It's really hard to replace being in the office. Historically, the Jewish tradition expresses an innate understanding of this power of connection. We see it through the emphasis on chavruta, that in its ideal form, the study of Torah is not done in isolation and silence in a library, right? Jews find libraries funny. What, are you going to go sit with a book alone and quiet? No. The Beit Midrash is a loud, noisy place. You cut each other off. You're yelling at each other. But through dialogical encounters and study partnerships known as chavruta. In the Talmud, we are learned, put yourselves into groups, kitot, to occupy yourselves with Torah, for the Torah can only be acquired in company, in chavurah. Prayer, too, in its ideal form, is not done in isolation, but in sibur, a community gathered for prayer. As we all know, there are prayers that are only possible to say with 10 or more Jews are present to form a minyan. There's a real brilliance that you can't say Kaddish without a minyan. You can't just go say Kaddish at the lake. You need a minyan for Kaddish. In general, Judaism is a religion that emphasizes communal life, kahila, and the bonds that obligate us to one another. Human connection has a moral dimension beyond simply being good for our physical well-being, mental health, and the good of society. Human connection is a pathway to fostering empathy and wholeness and understanding. But building connection means more than simply showing up. It requires showing up with intentionality. For this, we can turn to the tradition of the midot to better understand what qualities we should call upon when we connect with each other, right? You can see the translations on the screens, but they're anivut, savlanut, chesed, sakranut, shalom, simcha, ahava, teshuva, tzedek, achvut, haknasat, orchim, and so many others. By engaging with these midot, we get to experience human connection in a way that both contributes to the wholeness of others while also nourishing and fulfilling our own selves. Friend, to move towards conclusion, something interesting that Jewish communities in particular are grappling with now is how much to be mission-centered versus taking a big tent approach to inclusivity. In the case of the former, being mission-centered, you make clear what you stand for, and you put boundaries on who is included in that. Conversely, if you're taking a big tent, inclusivity-focused approach, then you need more tolerance for diverse missions and ideologies. An example in action. Does a shul's rabbi speak politics from the bima? If you're mission-centered, yes. If you're big tent-centered, no. Whichever approach a community takes, the focus should remain on providing connection, regardless of the size of the figurative tent. For example, any service or program should include an element where people intentionally interact with others in attendance. In this way, it's not just prayer or learning that's being offered, but connection with others. It was Barbara Streisand who famously sang, "People who need people are the luckiest people." Truly, we are blessed by the innate nature of our interdependence with one another, because more human connection leads to more care. This functions as a guardrail against us becoming so individualistic and competitive that life becomes unbearably lonely. In that way, it is a great gift that as individuals and a society, we thrive when we are connected. Okay, friends, I would love to hear from you on anything or anything related or unrelated. Hey, Gary. Gary, then Janie.
Good morning, everybody, again. I was listening to a program the other day, I think it's on Sunday, and they were talking about this Charlie Kirk thing that we also exploded, and that church or synagogue affiliation is really kind of plateaued at this time. It was going down, so it's plateaued, but yet it has increased tremendously with young men. And I found that interesting with all that's going on that the psychologists are talking about with AI and the isolation of men in their 20s and 30s. And so connected to me, what you were saying about reaching out to or connectiveness with the right, I just wonder, or as I'm concerned, about where does that lead us? It's one thing to have spirituality. It's another thing to be brought into a fold of radicalism. Because what I personally am seeing is maybe more and more Christian nationalism, but through a falsehood about what's going on, how they interpret, their texts the way they want to. We have that in our fold also. But that concerns me as we move forward about community. It's one thing to have community to bring people together with the same interest, but it's another thing to move them radically one way or the other.
Right. Yes. Great. So, by the way, this is the same reason why Chabad is so much more successful than Hillel on college campuses, like through the roof. Because Hillels, what do? They hire some 22-year-old person out of college to be an engagement professional on campus. Hillel is going to hire a 22-year-old out of college to be an engagement professional. And that 22-year-old cannot provide the human connection and engagement that a charismatic, rabbi, on campus is going to provide. And there's a bunch of other tools Chabad has that's different as well. And that's not a praise of Chabad or a critique of Hillel. It's just part of the phenomenon of what those institutions can provide. And so, and now, but bracketing that and looking at the evangelical world or the Christian nationalist world, I think it's absolutely true that more and more young Christian men and non-Christian men are going to be looking to that model for structure and stability and community where they can't find it elsewhere. And I think rather than just critique that, because there will be a lot of good there for that, I think we're going to have to follow that same playbook to make sure young people, not just young people, all people are finding the connection they need. Because if only those with a certain agenda are providing that, our society is going to be in trouble. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. And by the way, the power of music as well. That's something, again, that Chabad will engage more than Hillel. But also that the evangelical world, there's a progressive evangelical church that has invited me to speak a few times. And when I go to their Sunday morning service, my gosh, these people got their hands up and they got guitars and they're dancing around. You think you went to a Karlbach minion, and it's that there's a lot of soul in the room. And so, yes, anyway, so much more to say about that. But I think this Kirk thing is not going away anytime soon. I don't know if you saw what Oklahoma is now doing. There's a proposed law in Oklahoma to mandate a statue of Charlie Kirk be on every college campus in Oklahoma. So, all right, well, I don't want to get too far down that, but right now, really the making him into a saintly figure is exactly what we're talking about here, really. Is a society that is longing for a connection so much that certain people have been made into saints for what they represent. So there's a lot more to unpack there. But Janie, let's go to you here.
Well, I have a couple of points, and I do think they're related. You were talking about Hari's addiction is bonding, and you touched on drugs. That's the whole basis of gangs, is they give them connection that they don't have in their family or with friends, and of course that's a given. When you're talking about a loneliness, I think you touched on loneliness versus solitude, and there's a huge difference. And I think, to me, that's the foundation of a lot of what is wrong. You've been talking today about the groups, how the groups should be offering different alternatives for connection. And I want to go beyond that and say the issue is not how many groups we have that can offer that connection, or the morality, if you will, the goodness of these groups, but it's that whole issue of the cause of loneliness. That's what we should be addressing. Why does someone feel sad or disconnected? That's what we should be working on, to find that connection to oneself, the connection to nature, the connection to God, if you will, whatever that is. There should be a feeling of connection and not loneliness when a person is by himself or herself. And if they don't have that, it doesn't matter how many groups or the veracity of whatever group that is. It's the individual's soul consciousness. That's what we have to build on, not focus on the connection, but who is that individual that wants the connection, and how can we make that connection to something that transcends humans or groups?
Oh, Janie, I am so glad you said that. Thank you so much, because you're absolutely right that we have been suggesting that the primary, maybe I was even suggesting the sole response to the loneliness challenge is one of human connection, and I think you're absolutely right that there are other forms of connection that are crucial here. Self connection, maybe God connection, nature connection, and maybe not only additional, but are actually the pathway to it as well, as you're suggesting. And here's a great Kabbalistic teaching that might resonate. Solomon ibn Gabriel, about 1,000 years ago, said human connection is like two string instruments across from each other. You have to strum your own string in order for the string instrument across from it to vibrate. Meaning, the only way to actually stimulate the response in human connection is to first awaken oneself, to strum one's own string. So I think that's exactly right, that which aspect of self is even open to connecting with the other? If you go in without even anything being open, there's no connection anyways. So there needs to already be a pathway within the self that's open. Otherwise, you can go from community to community and friendship to friendship and never really connect anyways, because that pathway was never even open. So yeah, Janie, thank you for that. I love that point. Yes. Okay. Hi, Ken.
I guess I don't really have a comment. I have a question.
Great.
Which was, you mentioned that the average male has less than one friend, and the average female has three. And I was wondering if there were any psychological studies on what the difference in emotional openness or whatever it is that causes that phenomenon. Why is it that in general, at least in my perception, men have friends at work who are not real friends. They're work colleagues, but but that women do make those connections and men don't. And I was just wondering whether there are psychological studies that try and flesh that out and make us understand why that is. So
Great. I love that question. And I think it's so important because in my response, I would only speculate. Having read some of those, I can't say I've read a comprehensive enough to be able to identify exactly that point. I think it's a great thing for me to look into more. And if you happen to look into it, I'd love to hear what you find as well. But I would love to look into that because I think we pretend like it's obvious, like, oh, women are more relational than men. It's inherent in their nature, or men are more shame-based, or or less vulnerable, so they can't struggle with the friendships. But I think these are oversimplifications oftentimes, and I think there's some larger dynamics at play here. And which, by the way, is part of the question about those who are comfortable remaining single, as they people who are single, I'm meaning not married or not partnered in their, let's say, 80s. The trends have shifted on that, on who's more comfortable being single, and that's also really interesting. As a side point to volunteering, there's one study I forgot to share, done out of the University of Berkeley, that the mortality rates of those who volunteered for 2 or more organizations reduced by 44%. Right? I should probably I probably don't want to. It might feel a little manipulative to use that to recruit volunteers, but volunteer with VBM or you're gonna die, right? But basically, if you want to reduce your mortality rate, 44%, come volunteer with us. So, I think that's a great selling point. But yes, your point about gender is really interesting. And while I personally can't relate to this whole kind of non-binary phenomenon going on among younger people, that has just really taken off. I mean, I get what they're talking about, but it's just so far from my personal experience as someone who feels very gendered. I wonder how some of that stuff is going to shift in a whole nother generation of people who feel so much less committed to their gender identities, and what that's going to mean. If that's going to be less friendships, more friendships, men and women, how it's going to shift as well. But yeah, anyways, yeah, Ken, thanks for that great question. So we got a few minutes left if anyone else wants to jump in. Eileen, we didn't hear from you yet, Eileen.
Oh, I have a lot I could say.
Good, to say some of it or all of it.
Okay, first of all, there's an interesting study Harvard produced in the past couple of months that people who lived with purpose and intention lived 7.5 years longer. And they lived healthier lives, which goes to what you were just saying, volunteering. Then I'll jump to a brand new book just published called Joy Span. The author posits there are 4 areas that we need to be aware of as we age. Connection is one of them. Growth, learning is another. Adapting to changes is third. And fourth is giving, where we've lived long enough, now we give of ourselves. And following in those 4 areas will produce happier people.
Great. I love that. Sometimes we just go to our annual doctor appointment, or maybe you're at the point where that annual doctor appointment is now 6 times a year. Whatever it is, we go and we think, oh, what does it mean for me to keep my health? Okay, I gotta walk a little more. Okay, fine. I gotta cut out some salt and sugar or whatever it is, right? But actually, go to your rabbi also and talk about how you're going to incorporate more VBM learning into your weekly plan, and how you're going to incorporate more volunteering into the plan, and you're going to have more connection in there, and all these things that it turns out we need to also be fully healthy people. Yeah, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe time for one more person if someone else wants to jump in. So Stan, we didn't hear from you, Stan.
No, you didn't. Am I muted? You hear me?
No, we got you.
Okay. Men are different than women. Had a friend of mine, he's still a good friend of mine. We used to play tennis every week. Played week after week after week. And then I heard later on from the grapevine that he was leaving his wife and he was marrying another woman.
Oh.
We never talked about that at tennis, or we used to go out and grab a bite afterwards, because men don't go there.
Right.
That's where I think we are. Men are different. Women will talk about. It's kind of like when you leave a party. When I want to go, there's 30 minutes of saying goodbye. My wife who's sitting here, and actually I've suggested to her, when we get to the party, why don't you start saying goodbye now? That way we can leave on time. But there are definite differences. I'm not really sure what they are. And my other comment was, you talked about this fictitious, young, charismatic rabbi. You used to be that, but there are not a lot of them out there. The young ones, for the most part, coming out,
Right,
seem to almost fit into your loneliness group. They don't really want to be a part of a synagogue community. I don't blame them for that.
yeah.
And they really very often don't want to be a part of a big community. So those are my two comments.
Yeah, amazing. I want to say three things to all that. First of all, yes, it has been a long time since I was called a young charismatic rabbi. Now they call me the graying, middle-aged, okay, rabbi. Yeah. So but those were the good old days when you're emerging in your late 20s, early 30s. Oh, so anyways, but actually they're having trouble finding any rabbis, and the Baker Foundation is now funding what they're calling tapping. They're trying to find a strategy for rabbinical schools to tap people, because what it turns out, that what is the biggest factor in being able to recruit someone to be a rabbi, and this is true of many other things as well, somebody tapping you on the shoulder. They're like, hey, I think you'd be great. It turns out that's true for everything. Hey, I think you'd be a great board member. Hey, I think you'd be a great volunteer in our team. Hey, but people think you just post on social media and people are going to show up. It doesn't work like that. You got to tap people on the shoulder and say, hey, I think you'd be great for this. So that's the first thing. The second thing you said about being able to leave events, Shoshana calls me the master escaper, because I will be triple booked and I have to be somewhere, and somehow I can sneak out the back door with at least thinking nobody can see me sneaking out, so I can get to my next commitment, whereas she is the worst master escaper. An event is an hour. She knows she's supposed to be there for 20 minutes. She ends up being there for an hour and a half. She's the last person to leave. She's like, how could I leave? There's people talking to me. So, okay, well, you say I got to go now. Or you just say you go to the bathroom and you got the back door. So it's because she's far more righteous than me, that she will just stay until something is totally done. And I'm out the door as soon as I can to get to the next thing. In any case, but to your last point about men and friendship, there was a young guy who last week reached out to me. Can we meet to talk about spirituality? I have no spirituality in my life. He's doing great in his business and had some kids, but realized something is missing. And so in the conversation, at some point, I asked him something personal, like, tell me one of your top life regrets. And he looked at me like, what? I wasn't coming here for a therapist. I was coming here for spirituality. So look, part of the pathway of spirituality is some vulnerability in relationship, I think it's not at all surprising that we can play tennis with someone for that long and that not happen. In fact, in another friendship recently, something major was happening in the person's life, and I was shocked to have only heard about it, some months after the fact. So, interesting point. All right. Any last comments here? Yes, Gary. Gary gets the last comment here.
Yeah, I just want to respond to Stan, and I'll beat him up tonight at dinner. But I think that our generation, he's absolutely correct that we keep things to ourselves for the most part. Men don't discuss certain issues. But I think our kids' generation have become very different about speaking out and having good friends and discussing whatever personal issues that they have. And I think that's going to change for the most part, because I think we as men feel society has changed and we're able to do the things that we want to do rather than live to a standard that was put upon us that we don't even know why. Our parents never talked about anything, and I think that was thrown onto us by our fathers. But I think that the generation below is breaking those chains.
Yes, yes, and as the old adage goes, we are the master of our emotions. It is so easy for us to still hold resentment towards parents who emotionally neglected us. To some degree or another, everybody was emotionally neglected by their parents. That they didn't feel seen emotionally, and we can continue to be resentful, or we can become the master of our emotions and transcend that, and become more emotionally available for others as well. So for those of you who engage with Yom Kippur in one way or another, I wish you a very meaningful opportunity to continue to unleash your unique potential in the world. And if you don't observe Yom Kippur, then whatever that day, the emotional and spiritual power of that day in the world should help us to continue to improve and strengthen our virtues and weaken our vices and strengthen human connection, however we might. Okay, we are off the next 2 weeks because next week is Sukkot and the following week is Shemini Atzeret or Simchat Torah. And it's funny at work, when you work for a non-Jewish place, you're like, okay, I need off work for Rosh Hashanah. Like, okay, I get it. I need to work off for Yom Kippur. Like, okay, I get it. Like, I need work off for Sukkot. They're like, really? Okay, fine. I guess. You're going to go in a hut? Say, I need work off for Shemini Atzeret. Like, now you're lying. What are you talking about? You need off work for what? All right. Have a wonderful day. See you soon. Gemar Chatima Tova.